Hello interwebs, I hope you're doing well, especially in the light of today's subject because it's going to be a little bit of a harder one to talk about because we need to discuss the allegations of harassment, creation of a toxic work culture, and even abuse surrounding creator, director, writer, executive producer Joss Whedon. And these allegations of abuse have been sort of building around Joss Whedon for the past 3 to 4 years, coming from multiple sources that have sort of spread the width and breadth of Joss Whedon's career, but this conversation specifically is being spurned on by actress Charisma Carpenter, who yesterday released allegations, or at least yesterday as they're recording this video, allegations and detailing the toxic work culture and harassment that Joss Whedon directed towards her, specifically on the sets of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and its spin-off show Angel, two shows for which Joss Whedon was the executive producer on. And while they didn't sort of start Joss Whedon's career, he had a career working on things like Toy Story and the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie before then, certainly springboarded his career into prominence, allowing him to go on to have one of the most influential careers in nerd culture, pop culture in general, considering he went on to create Firefly, Dollhouse, direct the Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron movies, and sort of direct that early phase of the MCU, which is now itself one of the biggest pop culture franchises, if not the biggest pop culture franchise in the history of pop culture, or at least modern pop culture. Now, a lot of my thoughts around Joss Whedon were echoed quite beautifully in a video done by Council of Geeks over on her channel, my friend and fellow YouTuber, and I'll put the link to her video up here or down in the down below. But I also wanted to toss my hat into this ring because I think there is an important conversation that is being missed surrounding the fact that how was someone like Joss Whedon not only able to get away with these alleged types of behavior that have been going on throughout his entire career, as we've seen from, someone like Charisma, who knew Joss early in her career, all the way through until Justice League, given that cyborg actor Ray Fisher came out alleging sort of harassing and abusive behavior from Joss Whedon on the set of Justice League, which was a fairly recent movie. So this is something that clearly has been going on throughout Joss's entire career. So how was he able to get away with something like that? And not only that, and more importantly, how was he able to do that while also cultivating an image of being a feminist and progressive creator, someone that people were supposed to look up to as someone who was able to push nerd culture and geek culture forward in terms of representing women, representing minority groups, focusing in on underrepresented minorities within a science fiction and fandom that normally did not center these voices. How is he able to cultivate that image for himself while also doing these harassing things behind the scenes? And also, I think it's important to take a look at who has come forward against Joss Whedon and why they were either only able to come forward recently or only felt that they were able to come forward recently, and also what has happened to some people like Ray Fisher because they have come forward, and sort of talk about the importance of that, because I think there is something important to be talked about who gets to ignore these types of actions, both in front of and behind the camera. So to get into this discussion, I think it's really important to kind of look at the timeline of events when it comes to who came forward when with allegations against Joss Whedon. So in 2017, right after they had gotten divorced, Joss Whedon's ex-wife Kai Cole released an essay detailing issues of harassment and abuse that she faced during the time that verbal abuse, I should also make clear, during the time that she was married to Joss Whedon. A little while after that, actor Ray Fisher, who played Cyborg on the Justice League movie, came forward with allegations detailing harassment and abuse and toxic work culture that was created on the set of the Justice League reshoots that were shot by Joss Whedon when he came in to take over from Zack Snyder on that project. Those allegations spurned an investigation from Warner Media into those allegations of abuse on the set, but those investigations were rather contentious between Warner Media and Ray Fisher, given that Ray Fisher publicly stated a few times that he did not feel that the investigation was being handled well, and Warner Media accused him of not cooperating with them, and Ray Fisher saying that, yes, I did cooperate, but I didn't want to talk with you if you're not going to do a thorough investigation and do one out of house, not just within Warner Media. But then Warner Media sort of released a statement saying that, they had done an investigation and actions were taken, but didn't detail any actions. And then Ray Fisher himself apparently was, I don't know if it was officially fired, but basically it was announced that he was not going to be appearing as Cyborg in the upcoming Flash movie. And the discussions around the Cyborg solo film that he was supposed to be getting have sort of been tabled or stopped or canceled altogether. Again, I don't know if any of that's been made official. But recently, yesterday, on the back of all the stuff that Ray Fisher has been facing, Charisma Carpenter, as I said, released allegations detailing her experience on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. And then since coming out with her allegations, a lot of the actresses and actors on Buffy the Vampire Slayer came forward and stated their support for Charisma. Namely, I should say Sarah Michelle Gellar, Amber Benson, Michelle Trottenberg, all actresses, and I think it's important that I should say actresses, came forward to detail their experience, or at least support Charisma's versions of events surrounding Joss Whedon. And the other also wrinkle that is in here as well is that James Marsters, who played Spike on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, also detailed a story kind of separate from this narrative of Joss Whedon assaulting him in a hall and saying, you're dead, about his character of Spike. He was not saying you're dead to the actor, but saying your character is dead, because Joss Whedon was apparently really pissed off that Spike became a very popular character and did not want to keep Spike around in the show, but sort of felt he had to because of the character's popularity, and so was very pissed off about it and assaulted James Marsters in the hall because of it. And that came out on a podcast that James Marsters was on that was sort of spurned on by nothing in specific to do with this sort of narrative. Now, I highlight this timeline of events in terms of allegations of abuse against Joss Whedon because I think it's important to look at a few themes that have come out in terms of looking at that timeline. First and foremost, almost every single person details a pattern of behavior that began at the beginning of Joss Whedon's career all the way until the current day. Each person details even specific acts of harassment and toxic work environments that Joss Whedon created on all of his sets. Specifically, for example, Charisma Carpenter mentions the fact that when she became pregnant during the 4th season of Buffy the Angel, Joss Whedon took her into his back room and asked her, "Are you going to keep it?" Which is such a horrible thing to say to a woman who is pregnant. Like I said, I already mentioned the story from James Marsters. Charisma also goes on to detail that she was called fat, that she was insulted several times throughout her entire tenure on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. Ray Fisher himself details specific moments of harassment and abuse on the set of Justice League. So this is clearly a recurring pattern of behavior. However, another important theme emerges within this narrative. When we look at Kai Cole's allegations against Joss Whedon, as well as Charisma Carpenter's allegations against Joss Whedon, they both make reference to this idea that both of them felt that they could not come out against Joss Whedon, especially at the time which they were dealing with his harassment, specifically because Joss Whedon was someone who was looked up to by the industry. As I already stated before, Joss Whedon had cultivated this air of being a feminist and being someone who was progressing science fiction and nerddom in a way that had never been done before. I mean, Joss Whedon was someone who created Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That was a landmark show, not only because it was one of the few science fiction fantasy shows on at the time that sort of centered a main protagonist who was a strong female character in the form of Buffy Summers, but also the fact that that show had a diversity of really, really strong and different women. You had Willow, you had Dawn, you had Tara, you had Charisma Carpenter as well on that show, as well as different shows on at the time that he went on to create, like Firefly, which featured tons of really diverse female characters. You had Zoe, you had River, you had Kaylee on that show, and a few others as well. Like, Joss Whedon cultivated this idea of being a feminist creator, that he was someone who was willing to put women and put different identities and minorities into stories where they had not typically been seen before. And I cannot tell you how important that was for myself and for many others. My best friend spoke about how Buffy meant a lot to them, to finally see a woman who meant so much and could be strong and important and get to have that place alongside other science fiction pop culture icons. at the time. For myself personally, Firefly was one of the few shows that when I was a closeted trans woman as a young kid, I got to see what being a woman could be. That being a woman could mean being many, many different things. It didn't have to be like cute and feminine, the damsel in distress, or the caretaker role. That you could be sort of the strong badass like Zoe, or the dirty engineer like Kaylee, or the like crazy science fiction mind person, whatever River is on that show. So his works were incredibly important, and there's no denying that. We shouldn't deny how important his works were. But because of that, both Charisma Carpenter and Kai Cole felt that they could not come out with allegations against him because they would not be believed, because how could someone like Joss Whedon, this feminist icon, do something so horrible behind the scenes? I want to read Charisma Carpenter's statement here, really briefly on that. She says, "Despite the harassment, a part of me still sought his validation. I made excuses for his behavior and repressed my own pain. I have even stated publicly at conventions that I'd work with him again. Only recently, after years of therapy and a wake-up call from the Time's Up movement, do I understand the complexities of this demoralizing thinking. It is impossible to understand the psyche without enduring the abuse. Our society and industry vilify the victims and glorify the abusers for their accomplishments. The onus is on the abused, with an exception to accept and adapt to the employable. No accountability on the transgressor who sails on unscathed, unrepentant, remorseless." Those are incredibly powerful words from Charisma, and kind of show this culture that we have created around creators like this. We put creators like Joss Whedon on this pedestal because they create works that are so important to us, and we want the values that they stand for in their works to be reflected in the person. And so we create this air of perfection and mystique and grandiosity around these creators, and we want to uplift them. And because of that, it creates this air of silence that people who face abuse from these creators can't speak out, because if they do, they would be knocking that symbol that this person has become in our eyes, and therefore they are the ones that will face abuse because they are attacking this symbol of perfection, this thing that has become so important to us. We don't really care that much about Joss Whedon the person. We care more about what Joss Whedon the creator means to us symbolically, and we don't want that to be attacked. And so for Charisma to have come out at that time would have meant that she would have faced a ton of abuse. It also would have hurt her career because it would have seemed like she was rocking the boat. And that still happens today, by the way. As we saw with Ray Fisher, who is no longer going to be playing Cyborg in the Warner Brothers DC films, if you come out with allegations against someone who is powerful, who has this air of mystique about them, you may face harm to your own career because of that. I really hope that Ray Fisher gets to have a long and prosperous career, but it has definitely been hampered by the fact that he has done the right thing and spoken out against Joss Whedon. He did the right thing. It's important to note that he did the right thing, and because of that, his career is probably going to be, it has already been deeply harmed because of that. Our society glorifies these creators, glorifies these people, because we want to have these symbols of people to uphold because their work means so much to us. But it is incredibly important that we remember that by doing so, we create situations where people behind the scenes are forced to face harassment invisibly, are forced to endure it over and over and over again without having access to be able to speak out. I also want to point to the fact, like I said, with this timeline of events, that it was all dominoes effect. Kai Cole came out against Joss Whedon, which probably enabled Ray Fisher to feel more confident in his coming out, which then enabled Charisma Carpenter to feel confident in her coming out. Charisma Carpenter, as I said, stated specifically that Ray Fisher was the inspiration for her wanting to come out at this time. And so many other women came out in support of Charisma. It all piles onto each other. That solidarity with each other is what allows these allegations to finally come forward. It is also incredibly important to note who the people that came forward and who supported each other were, because it has all been, for the most part, women and people of color that have shown solidarity in terms of standing up against people like Joss Whedon and their abuse. Charisma Carpenter, Kai Cole, Ray Fisher, all women and or people of color. And the people that have come out to support them, Jason Momoa, who came out to support Ray Fisher, Gal Gadot, who kind of gave a sort of lukewarm response that things behind the scenes of Justice League were not the best, but I will at least put that in the camp of supporting Ray Fisher. You have Sarah Michelle Gellar, like I said, Amber Benson, Michelle Trottenberg. These are all women that came out to support Charisma Carpenter. But then you have people like Alan Tudyk, who, don't get me wrong, I love Alan Tudyk, and I'm not saying that Alan Tudyk necessarily did anything specifically wrong, but Alan Tudyk, when he heard the allegations that Ray Fisher said against Joss Whedon, Alan Tudyk released a statement saying, I wasn't there, but that doesn't sound like Joss Whedon to me. That doesn't sound like something he would have done. And I'm not saying that Alan Tudyk has anything malicious when saying that. I'm just saying that because Alan Tudyk was a straight white guy, he probably did not have to endure or even see or even have to face this harassment that Joss Whedon directed at women and people of color behind the scenes of his works. That Joss Whedon, because he was a person in this powerful position, felt that he could get away with targeting minorities, targeting women, saying things to women because they are women. And again, I am not saying that Joss Whedon was sitting here as like, ha 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 ha, I'm going to attack women. I'm going to be sexist because that's what I want. No one thinks in those terms. No one's that like mustache twirly villain. No one's saying like Joss Whedon was like, aha, I'm going to attack women now because I can get away with it. But we created this feeling in society and on the sets of his work that he was this powerful, important person. And because of that, he felt that he had the right to be able to say these things to women, to be able to say to Charisma, are you going to keep your baby? To call her fat on set, to create that toxic work environment. It's important to note that. It's important to note that the people who face these problems most directly are women and people of color over and over and over again. And that other men, straight white men, again, this is not an insulting straight white men, but just saying because straight white men are straight white men, we're able to turn a blind eye to it. Again, that's not insulting Alan Tudyk. I like Alan Tudyk. I think he's a great actor. I'm enjoying Resident Alien. It's a great show. But he's able to look past it. He's able to not see it because of his identity. And I think that's incredibly, incredibly important to note, that when we give people this air of power, they are able to target their power against people who our society, let's just face it, values less. So to wrap this out, what do I hope happens going forward? Well, I hope first and foremost that Joss Whedon's career in Hollywood is at an end. It is unfortunate to realize and to note, but this has just always been the case, that the reason that Joss Whedon was able to continue his career was because he continued to make people money. And they did not care or give one damn about the fact that he was creating a toxic work environment, because he had this air about him and he was able to bring prestige to a project and also bring money to a project to continue making companies money. And the only reason that they hopefully will stop hiring him now is because these allegations have reached such a fevered pitch, have become so obvious and talked about, that Joss Whedon will no longer be able to make the money because people will drop support for a project. And it is sad that that is the cynical reasoning for this. And it is really frustrating how capitalism works, but that's a whole other conversation. But I really hope that Joss Whedon no longer gets these projects. As for us, people who want to consume nerd works and want to continue watching these things, I am not here to tell you that you cannot watch anything that Joss Whedon created. I personally love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I will probably be returning to it at some point. And it's also made a little bit easier for me to return to those works because I know that Joss Whedon was not the only voice on those works. I would love to support Sarah Michelle Gellar. I would love to support Charisma Carpenter, and rewatching those works, despite the fact that Joss Whedon had a big creative voice in it, is something that I will still feel okay with doing personally, because I like supporting those actors and actresses and creatives behind the work besides Joss Whedon. But if you feel that you no longer want to associate or watch anything that Joss Whedon is behind the scenes on or worked on, I totally, completely understand that. That is something that you have to determine for yourself, that you have to sense out your own comfortability with. And there is no right or wrong answer. If you want to keep watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer or the Avengers movies or things like that, I totally understand it. There's nothing wrong with you for wanting to do that. If you don't want to watch those things, that's also understandable too. The only thing that we have to do, and I say that every single one of us has to do, is that when we do watch these works or when we do talk about these works, that we never forget what Joss Whedon did on the sets of those works, the harm that he caused behind the scenes, even if he did good things too, like I said, with uplifting female stories and showing that women can take part of science fiction and fantasy stories as well. That is an important part of his work that we should not ignore. He did do good, but we cannot ignore the bad either. So whenever we do watch these works, as with works by any problematic creator like J.K. Rowling or Orson Scott Card, I'm not saying that you can't or shouldn't watch or enjoy their works, but that when you do, come to it with a critical eye. Come to it with awareness. Come to it with understanding the context in which these works sit, both the good and the bad. That is what I always talk about on this channel, that we always just have to understand the context of which a work sits in. That it is never clear-cut as work good, work bad, but that work is complicated. And I think that that's always what we need to be doing. So if we do talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like if I ever talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer on this channel, I will always bring it up within the context of, I like the show. I think it's an important work on the, for fiction and science fiction, but also Joss Whedon was really terrible behind the scenes. And so I think that we just need to acknowledge the complicated place that this work sits in. And I think we should do that with all problematic creators and Joss Whedon in specific. All right, just a couple quick announcements. I'm also going to be doing a video on Gina Carano that will be coming out tomorrow on Friday, which also means that my video that was going to be coming out on Friday on transgender puberty blockers, a video that I'm really, really proud of and excited about, is going to be premiering on Saturday instead of Friday. So everything's sort of getting shifted. So just be aware, Gina Carano video tomorrow because I want to have a discussion on her as well, and then a video on Saturday that will be my sort of normal big, produced video that I normally do every single week. So just be aware of all of that. But thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Don't forget I have a Patreon as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Patrons, you are my patrons. You are so awesome. So here are your names. Catherine Lambeth, Eli Berg Moss, Ashley Allen, Bo Kikio, Miranda Janelle, Ashlyn Solstice, Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Camille T, Randy Thompson, Stephen Schuhart, Boyd Earl, and Mary Beth Earl, Wellington Marcus, Wayne Twitchell, Rick Osborne, Roar, Ish the Mad, Piston Twisted Garage, Dominic Noble, Buttoneer, John Steele, Michael Beam, Gavin Robinson, Carmen Olson, William Stewart, Amanda Ronya, Hannah F., Nathan Olson, Andrew Jorgensen, BBD, Jason Knott, Maeve, saying it twice because I can, Andrew K., Bree Beecher, Jasmine, Nathan Steele, Skylar Gray, Lily, Tiffany Danger, Sean Piper, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Bush, Jane Packard, Geek Filter, Mari Neckard, Jacob Tovar, Polymenia, Celestial Dawn, Jean Mithun, Sarah Bystam Din, Mark the Edge, Corey Honkinen, and Vale the Pale Dunn, Lysa, W. Randy Eady, Andrew Lamoureux, Zone 1 Librarian, and finally, Michael Hardy. I am sorry for that, but seriously, thank you so much, patrons. You really mean the world to me, and you really are changing my life, even if I may have changed your life for the worst with my singing. Thank you so much for all of your support.